Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Conscious Talk, radio that makes a difference. And do you use projection in there because we don't want to feel the pain? We project our own pain or wounding onto others, and this is where we actually create the problem?
I use it a little differently, Brenda.
Mm-hmm.
One, I use transference.
Yes.
That we perceive other people and instances and events as someone or something or some experience we had in childhood, and that's how we see them and experience them, and we don't really see who they are or relate to them as who they are, and that needs to be worked through. And when I think of projection, I think of an example. Maybe this is the same thing you were saying. I'm not sure. I should ask you to say it again. Let me go on and say it, and we'll find out.
Right.
Let's say Susie is really, really angry. She had a really painful childhood. She was abused, and she was angry, but it wasn't safe for her to be angry in the household because she would be abused more.
Mm-hmm.
So she buries her own anger, and then this would be a case of both transference and projection. She projects her anger onto somebody else.
Right.
She thinks I'm angry when it's really she who is angry.
Mm-hmm.
But she also transfers the abusive parent onto other people. So it gets very delicate and entangled and needs to be teased apart, not just on the level of our minds, but on the level of our emotions.
Right, and that's what is so important here in connecting a lot of the dots with what we've talked about for years on the show. The internal landscape, our internal landscape is formed by a lot of things. And what, if I get this right, what we're talking about is what we've referred to as those often as those long-habited patterns. They're actually energetic patterns that are out of space and time for our current circumstances, but we act as if we're in the same time. I mean, those are those kinds of triggers. And we see this exhibited everywhere around us.
Yes. They are energetic patterns, they are mental patterns, they are emotional patterns, they are cellular patterns, even if somebody isn't yet acting on them physically. And I think one of the ways that it's fairly easy for people to get it, even if they can't yet connect with it themselves, is that the child that we once were, who was experiencing pain or who was traumatized or anywhere on the continuum, that child is still alive inside us today. With all those feelings, all those decisions, all those beliefs, all those memories until we heal it. And even then, it's not like you spend a year healing it and you're done for life.
Right.
It's a lifelong process. But every time you go in to do the deep work, you start to dissolve and heal and transform the experience and the intensity and the rawness of the experience and the feelings. Particularly, people are most afraid of their feelings.
Yes.
And as you do that, you have a little bit more ease as you meet people and events and circumstances and yourself in the world, in the here and now. And you can even start to better discern what's here and now and what's a long time ago.
We want to bring it back to the 2016 election last year and reference it in regard to what you were talking about with this wounded inner child. How did that play out basically in this election?
It played out all over the place. Really, in every single person that was part of the process, from the candidates to the media to the citizens. There's not a person that wasn't part of this. I thought I would start Brenda, with the candidates, with the final two candidates.
Okay.
We could probably go through all of them and find something. But what was so striking to me, the whole time I kept looking to see what could I offer that wasn't me diagnosing somebody, because I don't do that. I'm a therapist, but I don't diagnose people. I attune to them. And I realized I didn't say to you that I'm also a midwife to the soul.
Mm.
So I don't just try to take care of symptoms and put Band-Aids on. I really go to the root.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally was able to get enough information that was like lay information, like things that were right out there that people could really grasp onto,
Mm-hmm.
for Hillary Clinton and for Donald Trump. And that's what I'd like to offer today, and then show how it might connect with other people.
Okay.
So Hillary said herself in a documentary that when she was 4 years old, that she was bullied by neighborhood kids, and that she was terrified, and that she went running into the house to her mother, and that her mother said to her, and this is a quote, "There's no room for cowards in this house.
Mm-hmm.
You go back outside and figure out how you're going to deal with what those kids are doing."
Mm-hmm.
That is breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
She's 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She's asking for help. Her mommy is telling her, there is no room for you in this house if you're scared and you don't go out and do this yourself.
Mm-hmm.
For a child, that is life and death.
Yes.
For a child, that says, you won't get to live here, you won't have a mommy, you won't have a home if you don't do this.
Mm.
So that penetrated for her, I dare to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from my experience with people, I just can't imagine that it didn't penetrate deep within. And a lot of what we've seen over the course of her public life is her dealing with bullies,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes successfully and sometimes not. But on the deepest level, Brenda and Rob, that wasn't about a woman learning how to deal with bullies. It was about a little girl doing what her mommy said so she would still have a home.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Very wounding.
Yeah.
Very wounding.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Wounding, terrifying,
Yes.
paralyzing, and yet, you know, what's a little girl going to do?
Right.
Except for follow mommy's rules so that she can stay alive and safe, supposedly. I
And
have
loved.
that quote.
Hmm.
So shall I go on to Donald?
Well,
Yes.
yes, because
Go on to Donald.
taking
Go on
the
to
bully
Donald.
role.
Huh?
Taking the bully role.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So she found, drew, you know, like magnetically, energetically drew just the person to act that out with.
Mm.
Donald's father was I don't even have a word for how competitive he was.
Mm-hmm.
More than fiercely. It was like life and death for his father. But he also made it like life and death for the kids. And his way of life translated essentially into, and these are quotes from, again, from documentaries that I saw, life is a competition. You win or you lose. If you win, you're a killer and a king.
Mm.
If you lose, you're a nothing and you don't matter.
Wow.
And he taught his boys to win at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And here's little Donald, again, just like Hillary. Think of this. The two are alike in this manner. They are terrified not to do what their parent is telling them to do. Donald does not want to be a nothing to his father.
Right.
He does not want to not matter to his father. And on top of that, from very young, he later saw what his father did with his older brother, who couldn't win. That wasn't his nature. And his father did make him not matter. And so that, like that added and cemented it even more for him.
Mm-hmm.
So what Donald is doing and has been doing is all he wants to do is win. Everybody is painting so many other descriptions of it, and, I'm not going to say this one is right and this one is wrong, but this piece about winning at all costs, or else you don't matter, this life and death piece is deeper than anything I've heard anybody say.
Yes.
And I think it's crucial because then we can look at these two people who each have their own strengths and each have their own difficulties and weaknesses, and they have enacted their childhood wounds out not only in their lives but on the stage of our lives and our country's life and our world life.
Mm-hmm.
And to each of them, it was life and death.
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting because we've seen how on one side how Donald Trump exaggerates everything, makes everything literally huge. If there is a number out there for something, he's likely to double it, or more. And that kind of action, you get it in what you're saying is that he has to make himself at all times, quote, great, what he'd like to, quote, do for the country.
Bigger than he really is,
Yeah.
Because you're right on some level, and we're talking subconsciously here, Judith, correct? Right. They're not aware that they're acting this out. They're not aware that this is a life and death situation for them, but on a subconscious level, that's what drives the behavior.
Exactly. So glad you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I usually do, but I was just so with the underlying things. So yes, it's unconscious. They might remember the parents saying something. Both of them, from what I can tell, idealize their parents. When I heard Hillary talk about the bullying, she was idealizing her mother.
Oh, yes.
And Donald, everything I've heard him say about his father, he's idealizing his father. And that's what little children do when they are in such pain and fear that they can't tolerate it as children.
Right.
So
makes total sense.
Well, we've been talking about the elections from the point of view of, I think, something that we can all relate to, how we are run and how we exhibit what exists in our subconscious. And, you really laid out the case for childhood wounds and how they can carry forward. So, again, we watched the population kind of react with these folks, and then after the election kind of come back to their senses in a way. I mean, not making a value judgment, but a lot of people did not approach this rationally. They were very triggered on a subconscious level. Wouldn't you agree?
I believe that people were triggered on a subconscious emotional level. I think probably we all were. I can't imagine. I mean, I've worked with people in this time, both before the election and since the election, who have said they are so triggered, and we've worked with their triggers. And their choices were not destructive choices in the election, but their feeling state was deep and painful and intense, and inevitably what they were responding to, reacting to, were the triggers from their childhood. If I were talking about someone I work with who was sexually abused, they were just terrified that now someone who abuses women sexually is going to run the country, and people are normalizing it, and nobody's going to stop them. And the feelings were feelings from childhood. So here's a good example of using the poison to heal the medicine. Donald Trump's sexually abusing women triggered somebody from their own early experience of sexual abuse. And that trigger, this person utilized for her healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
a really good example because it shows you. And I was just thinking, Judith, that, if you're going to look for a purpose in things, if you're
going to look for what?
A purpose in things. Would we not say that this whole election process and the election in and of itself is serving all of us to awaken us to these wounded sides of ourselves that we may still be denying or hiding from?
We can certainly utilize it for that purpose, Brenda, and we really need to, because here's the piece about the poison is the medicine. If you don't use the poison for healing, there will be another round, and it will be escalated, and it will be more intense and more destructive, and we don't want that.
So, Judith, how do we heal these wounds? We obviously have a lot of work ahead of us to do, because one of the things that you mentioned is if we don't, then it will occur again, and it will play out maybe with different people on the stage, different circumstances, but it will be even more traumatizing and more intense, and that seems to be what it takes for us to break down in order for us to break through.
Isn't that sad?
Mm-hmm.
I said, isn't that sad?
Yes, it is sad. Yeah, but it seems to be the way of humankind.
So I'll say a few things.
Okay.
First, I do want to say that there is a lot of work to do, that this is a crisis, but it is also an opportunity for everybody to do their own inner healing work, and for us to do it together, and for us to know that every single person who does his or her own healing work takes some of the destructive energy and drive out of the collective unconscious so that it's not at play anymore. So people can't say, I'm only one person, I can't do anything.
Right,
to do one's own healing is an amazing, powerful part we each play.
Right.
That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, no matter where this goes now, no matter how long it takes us to get through it, that when we get to the other side, we need new fertile ground as a foundation. And if we haven't started to create our ground from healing, from looking inward and healing and seeing, what happened to us in the past and how it affects us now and how it affects other people in our life and how it affects our country and our world. If we don't do that, again, we will just recreate it all over again. I think in many ways that's why things like World War II's, the seeds of what happened in World War II are happening now. People can see it. People are talking about it. We didn't do the work. People didn't know about it. So now, thanks to you, thanks to me, and thanks to other people, people are learning about it. And it is our new ground upon which to live. We are in the process of starting to weave the fabric. I know I'm mixing metaphors, but to weave the fabric of a whole new ground for living.
Yes.
I think with each generation, one of the things that we have noticed is that certain energies on the planet, until they are really healed, they'll repeat. For those of us who remember the 60s and what that was like, we were kind of shocked that this didn't happen earlier because we saw the same seeds of discontent and dissent and yet they weren't really expressed. They weren't transparent to most of the people on the planet, especially the ones who were younger, who hadn't experienced it before. And then you end up in the same place again. And that was very reminiscent of what you were talking about, the seeds of World War II, just expressed a little differently in a little different space-time.
But one of the things I want to add to this, Judith, and I know that you will agree with this, is instead of looking out there, and the tendency is to say, what the hell is wrong with people out there, or what the hell is wrong with the world, we look inside, and it's not what's wrong with us, it's what's wounded in us. And that is neither good nor bad. It simply is, and we have to deal with that. And until we can own it and not put our judgment upon it, I think that's part of the problem, Judith, is that nobody wants to look inside and look at the wounding or the dark side or whatever you want to call it. It's very hard to own that because of shame and guilt.
Shame, guilt, fear, fear of being judged, fear of being hurt, fear of being re-wounded by someone else, if not oneself. Fear of not being able to change, fear because most people don't know how to do it. So, yes, I totally agree with you. We need to look inward. I was going to connect to what I was saying about World War II and what's here. As I was feeling into what to write in my article for after the election on my blog, several things came to me, and one of them was a quote from somebody on a professional listserv, and it's a quote by Norman Mailer, and he says, "I really am a pessimist. I've always felt that fascism is a more natural governmental condition than democracy. Democracy is a grace. It's something essentially splendid because it's not at all routine or automatic. Fascism goes back to our infancy and childhood, where we were always told how to live. We were told, yes, you may do this. We were told, no, you may not do that. So the secret of fascism is that it has this appeal to people whose later lives are not satisfactory." I don't think the satisfactory part is as much as people who don't know that they were wounded and they are stuck in the wounding they experienced in infancy and childhood. And they are stuck wanting good parents who will take good care of them and not let them suffer. And they don't know how to get out of that. But I think the key is people need to realize that we are driven by a child that is still alive inside us, that is from when we were children, that is in all likelihood pre-verbal, living with the emotions of what we experienced, and that's driving us beneath our awareness. And it's not all that is us, but if we don't realize that that's driving us beneath our awareness, we can't work this through.